We're delighted to be joined by Elliot Walker. Elliot's career as a glass artist has taken him from 4 years of education in the industrial Midlands to the heart of London as part of Peter Layton's glassblowing studio team, eventually to a Stourbridge workshop with over 200 years of glass history, and one of the four remaining traditional glass cones left in the UK. In 2022, Elliot was selected as a contestant on the surprise Netflix hit show Blown Away, where through cool-headed determination, he was crowned the winner of season 2, finishing the series with an incredible autobiographical installation put together with the help of the Corning Museum of Glass team in just 8 hours. And in 2024, he was awarded a Heritage Craft training bursary supported by Soane Britain to travel to the United States to learn the finer skills of mouth-blown flat glass making in the hope of reviving this recently extinct craft in the UK. Welcome, Elliot.
Thank you for having me.
I hope that was relatively accurate.
That's fine. Painful as ever, but fine.
Brilliant. So we'll make a start by going back to the beginning. Could you tell us a little bit about what first drew you to glass blowing and how your journey in the craft began?
Well, I started off with stained glass. So it was in school, like in sixth form. I stayed at school for sixth form and I was studying chemistry and psychology and biology. So they were my A levels. And I had nothing artistic to do. I was like, I think inherently I've always been interested in the arts and I was a musician as well. And so I randomly came across this like adult education evening class in stained glass, which was ran twice a week. Actually, it was like a sort of short, intensive summer course. So I went there like twice a week with a bunch of adults, and it was great. The guy who was doing the tutelage, I think he was just like pleased to have like someone from a different demographic in the room for once, and so he sort of like took me under his wing and sort of really encouraged me with it. And yeah, and I carried that process on through my first degree. So I did a degree in psychology in North Wales, and I basically carried on making stained glass through the entirety of that degree. In my halls of residence, I had my grinding station and stacks of sheet glass that I would walk through to get to the bed. So it was a bit of a disruptive hobby, I guess, to have in a joint living sort of situation, grinding and smashing and welding and soldering and all sorts of stuff going on. But I just got obsessed with it, really. And then the more I learned about the material itself, the more interested I became in the various methods and practices that are within glass. It's so varied. And as with a lot of people, when they start sort of getting into glass and studying, they go from cold processes, and by degrees more and more temperature is introduced, and so you sort of work your way through these processes until you get to the zenith, which is, it's not like the best version, but it's the hottest version, and it's like a natural progression for some people who just feed off this drama and this sort of intensity of process, and it builds as you go along. And in the end, I ended up with glass blowing. It wasn't something that I ever really wanted to do. Even when I was studying for like my first sort of formal education at college in glass, when I'd finished my first degree, I saw the glass blowing studio and I didn't really want anything to do with it. I was interested in lost wax casting because I wanted to train in sculpture and be a sculptor, but using glass. So glass blowing and sculpture, it's still early days for that as a material, and so it didn't really have the same sort of interest for me at the time. But as anyone who does the process will tell you, once you start, the it's a very addictive process because there's so much inherent failure in the process. So you're always trying to perfect something you can never actually perfect. So that's sort of how I ended up getting into it, through like a gateway drug and then heavy addiction by the end of it.
Fantastic. And so the degree in psychology, was that because at the time you couldn't see yourself in a craft career, or was it kind of pressure you put on yourself to pursue an academic route?
Yeah, it was the academic route. I mean, I was always like reasonably academic in general. Um, anyone from my family anyone who knows me and has known me for a long time, it's not, the artistic thing is my thing in my heart of hearts, but as with most people in formal education, it's not something which is seen as a viable option or as encouraged. And being from, unless you're from a certain background, it's something that's actually really difficult to get into. And for me, it wasn't the sort of thing where I could waste money and time learning to do a craft. uh, I wasted money and time learning to do a psychology degree, which is like just as useless, I guess.
Yeah, it makes me think of all those young people that maybe didn't have the tenacity to continue it in their spare time and maybe have been lost to the craft sector,
Yeah,
under
yeah.
pressure to go down the academic
It's
route.
probably very, very common, really. Um, you know, I'm just, when I first started practicing the craft itself, it was always in my head, I need to monetize this. I need to actually be able to make money because I need to make a living if I'm going to pursue this at all. It's like you can't, glass is quite a difficult thing, especially glass blowing. It's quite a difficult thing to do as a hobby because it's so expensive to even, turn the furnace on. So yeah, I always had that in the back of my mind. You need to actually make this work financially.
So after your glass training, was that when you moved to London to join Peter Layton's studio?
Yeah, so I got picked up by the team at London Glassblowing through a amazing art fair, Art in Action, which was at Waterperry Gardens. I'm sure a lot of people have been there or heard of it. And that was really the one place and the one time in the UK where glass blowers, especially, and people working with glass would actually get together in a group and do the whole network thing. We don't have like a natural home in the UK where we do go meet, except for the festival, which I'd been a part of as well. But Art in Action was really, it had much more scope. It was obviously a mixed discipline event, like a big mixed discipline event, and so a lot of people from different areas would go to it. And I got spotted while I was demonstrating with a friend of mine on the glass stage. I did it for about 3 years with my friend Tim Boswell, who I was studying with at the time. And yeah, and so Peter got in touch with me in the last year of my my part-time masters at Wolverhampton and basically said, when you're done, please come here and work with us. And that was like one of those lucky breaks that you really sort of realize how grateful you are for it later on. And so yeah, I managed to move down to London, and I was working for 2 weeks with Peter and the team. So it was a pretty crazy time of my life because I was working for 2 weeks in London for Peter, covering for a glassblower, Lane Rowe, who was doing a 2 week on, 2 week off thing. And then for another 2 weeks of the month, I was driving back to the Midlands and I was working, hiring a studio here and making components for a chandelier company. So I was on the road like a lot. And then my partner at the time was living in St. Ives. So every 2 months, I'd go down to St. Ives to the Leach pottery she was working at and then spend a week down there as well. So it was all go, at that point, all go. And you really had to move, I felt like I had to move around to keep all of these jobs that
Mhm.
I'd been sort of working on going, and then obviously trying to fulfill my own sort of artistic pursuits as well with my own work.
Yeah. So how did being part of such an established studio influence your artistic development, but also your commercial sense as well of kind of operating within a market?
Well, Peter's great at the whole commercial side of it. He's a pro at that. And he's done an amazing job over the years to build that studio and gallery to what it is today. I mean, he's had a lot of help, and like his partner, his wife Anne, is who runs the gallery and sort of had the real vision for it. But Peter's always like on the hustle with this sort of thing. He's always after new projects, and so that came across like quite heavily. That this is something which you can make a good living from. But then the most important thing I learned there was I ended up being Peter's like experimental friend or whatever. So he would use me to do like the weird stuff. And we developed this series in my first sort of 3 years there called Burano, which was like a really complicated lace work, very heavy, thick, but really refined shape. And it took us 2 years to get anywhere with this series. And like we spent like 6 months at one point, day after day, me and Tim Rawlinson, who was my sort of main guy there, making wise, making huge pieces, making massive mistakes, really expensive mistakes. And Peter could see something was coming at the end of it. He could see that it was going to be worth it. And he spent that time and invested that money and used us to get to the end. And that is the thing that I learned the most from being there. It's like, if you put the time in and you're willing to sacrifice something, if you've got that vision, then it's worth doing it. It's worth putting more than you think something is worth financially into it to get something really special out of it. That's the biggest takeaway that I had from that place. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, it involves a great deal of courage to be
A
able
lot
to
of
take that
courage. Yeah.
financial hit
I
and
mean,
see
I
see.
was happy I was being paid, but I did, at some point, but it made me want to try my hardest. And that's another thing Peter's really good at. He gets the best out of you because it's like he puts the pressure on in a very, very Peter sort of way.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So how long was it after that that you made the move back to Stourbridge? And was it the historical significance of the location that prompted that?
So the move back was so we've been here 3 years in the studio
Hmm.
now at the Red
Yeah.
House Glass Cone. So it's a recent thing. Um, Before that, I was sharing a studio on the outskirts of London. We had a studio. I was sharing a studio in King's Cross for about 3 years with another glassmaker who's very established as well, Simon Moore. And then we moved and had a joint studio in Hertford. So I was never full time at Peters. I was always
Mhm.
doing something else and pursuing my own career and working to build a studio of my own. And then making this move to Stourbridge was basically coming home for me because from the Black Country, I studied in this area. My family are here, and the Cone is where I spent like most weekends when I was studying glass, demonstrating to the public. So the opportunity to come back to a public site with people walking past and poking their heads in and coming and have a look and being able to educate people. It's like we have school groups in here, and I'm not obliged to do the school groups, but I love it, and so we get them all seated there, get them all excited and buzzing and really annoy the teachers and stuff like that. So having that sort of interaction with the public and being able to educate and demonstrate and shock and scare and like amaze people is like really important. So this site is where you should be able to turn up to Stourbridge and see something happening with glass. And if I can make that something really special, then that's why I want to be here, really.
Yeah, because you've got the Glass Museum across the road, and they've got a public remit for public engagement, and
They do,
but
yeah.
whereas you're a commercial business, you're doing it purely for the need to get the story of glass out there.
And people like that difference. You see, we have people who go. I mean, the museum's fantastic, and Alistair and his team over there are doing some amazing stuff, and it's a really great place. Like you said, they do have a remit, and they do have their sort of set piece for most of the time when they're demonstrating, and they have a way of doing things. People come over the road and see us, and we could be doing anything, and it could be like a really small part of a larger project or working for a client or having a client in and designing. And we always engage with people and they see a different side of it. They see it more as a job and as a commercial business and all that sort of thing. But then sometimes they might come in and I'm messing around with one of my weird projects and they leave baffled and confused. It's like you never know what's going to happen here. So
We'll come on to endangered crafts in a bit, but we do say the practitioners of endangered crafts that are really turning things around and doing well are the ones that have an open door policy, and there's whether that's inviting people into their workplaces and involving them in seeing the processes, or it's also showing your processes on social media. Consumers of craft are not just looking for a final product nowadays. They want to be part of the narrative of the story. They want to see how things are made. They want to see behind the veneer of kind of the public persona. So
Mm,
I think it's really good.
mm.
So moving through these various workshops and collaborations and partnerships, how would you give a summary of how your approach to glass evolved over that time? That's quite a broad question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I think the people that you're working with obviously influence you the most, and I never feel like I've stopped learning anything. I'm always like open and ready to be taught something new. Um, in every sort of area of this as a business and a practice. And I think, working with my partner Bethany, so she and we've been together 8 years. We've been working together the same amount of time. We were working together in the hot shop for 5 of those years, and it's a very, very intense sort of environment. So it's amazing that we last for as long as we did, like working together in the studio that long. But she has basically made the business, she's built a business around what we've been doing together. And my approach now is to really sort of, I like Beth organizes and directs everything. And so my approach is like really listen to what she's saying and get on board with what she's saying. And that's a lesson that I learned like quite early on. She knows what she's talking about, and that was quite a different thing for me, because I've been building my portfolio and my profile for so long on my own without worrying about that sort of side of it. And then to have someone come in with a vision and a structure, um, it has been really, really useful. And I feel terribly sorry for anyone I speak to who doesn't have someone like that, in their lives and in their
Mhm.
practice, because it's like it's been totally invaluable for me. Yeah, so that has been like a really important part of it, and without that influence, without her influence, we wouldn't be where we are. We wouldn't have made this move, and we wouldn't have made it work. So, and I think we'll be talking about Blown Away probably in a bit, I'm sure, but like she instigated all of that stuff as well. So I can't take credit for hardly anything anymore.
Well, the Heritage Crafts team came to visit you in December, and we did a day of glassworking with Bethany, and she was a
Yeah.
fantastic teacher. And I can totally understand what you're saying about she's really articulate in talking about her craft, but also the business and how it kind of sits within the market is.
Yeah, and she's a proper advocate for it, like where since we've been here, she's put on events, she's put on demonstrations, she's put on networking events, because the networking thing is so important, and it's been part of the festival, and then she's done some stuff separate from the festival as well. But she's a real like, yeah, advocate for other makers and makers coming through.
Definitely. We made these amazing little paperweights. I'm very proud of that. That sits on my desk. I look at that every day. So yeah, you mentioned Blown Away. You were selected for that Netflix show, and it really brought glass blowing to a global audience. How did it all come about? What was your initial reaction to being asked to participate?
Well, I didn't want to do it. That's the main thing. I didn't have any interest in putting myself through something like that. I didn't actually watch the first season when it came out. It's like it was, yeah, people say it was a surprise hit, and it was for everyone really. And for people within the community, it really was like a shock. Like, wow, people are really interested in this. So I knew what it was, and I was, interested to a certain point, but it's like it wasn't something that I ever wanted to do. And when the second season, they put out like a call out for people globally to apply, and I didn't apply. And then right at the very end, Beth managed to twist my arm into doing it. You should really just get over yourself. I think she probably said, "Get over yourself and do it." Make the application. So I did, and yeah, it's like, there was a point on my last interview to get on the show, and I had that sort of like deer in the headlight panic thing where I was like, Jesus, I could actually have to go and do this for 7 weeks or whatever. And they did that American thing at the end, like, why should we choose you? Give us your pitch. And I said, well, I'm not really sure if I can cope with it right now. It's not a great time. We're really busy. I'm having a furnace delivered, blah, blah, blah. And so I basically tried to talk them out of letting me do it. And Beth was in the other room just going, no, no. But for whatever reason, my honesty or whatever, they let me do it, and yeah, it was a brilliant experience. And I learned an awful lot about why people end up looking so awkward when they're filming, as a sort of layman non-actor sort of person, because it's such a strange process. It's so surreal, the whole process of filming. So yeah, I learned a lot about that, but I had a great time. And obviously it influenced, it instigated quite a lot of changes, like after it came out.
Yeah. Well, the show is renowned for its intense challenges and its tight deadlines. What was it like to work under that kind of pressure with the cameras watching your every move? And how did you keep your cool throughout all of that?
Well, I didn't at all. It's like keeping your cool wasn't really an option. I mean, they've edited like things very well, but if you watch it, like when they're doing the talking and the laying out of the challenge, I'm literally like in every frame, just like jigging or wiggling or like having some sort of like minor fit or something like that. So I didn't really keep my cool, and I don't think anyone could under that sort of situation. I mean, the thing about glass blowing is it is inherently dramatic, it is inherently hard, and things go wrong all the time. And you sort of get used to that as a professional. You have to get used to it because it continues happening throughout your entire career. So you get used to it. But when someone runs over when they see or hear something smash with a massive camera, and then someone comes with a clipboard and starts interviewing you, like right after it's happened, and you're sort of like trying to emotionally cope with the trauma, and then all of a sudden having to explain that trauma to people, and then thinking like in your head like the clock is ticking, because that's not how you make art, that's not how you make work. You don't get put on a time scale really. You're working with deadlines of weeks at least,
Hmm.
not like hours and minutes and stuff. So it was a very unusual way to sort of pursue a craft. And they were very strict on the timing. Like people asked like how much of it was faked and all that stuff, and it's like none of it really. It was all very to the letter. They gave us the time, and that was the time we had, and then we stopped when it was done. So when it's like they're coming down to the last 30 seconds and
Hmm.
literally trying to bonk the thing off and get it in the kiln, that was true. That happened to me multiple times. You set your barrier of like, you set your ambition literally to the minute of finishing, and it usually works out about right. So I've become quite an accurate keeper of time when it comes to making things, but I always don't, you don't leave yourself enough spare time really. So it was all sort of, pretty authentic really.
I guess that artificial jeopardy that they introduce makes for very good television, but did you feel that they were nearly crossing the line sometimes? And how were your kind of fellow contestants coping? Did anyone struggle?
Everyone struggled, yeah. I mean, and the artificial jeopardy, this is what I'm trying to say. That wasn't the case really, because it is naturally like that,
Hmm.
And so when someone has dropped something and they have like half an hour left to remake it and they're flustered and terrified, it's because they were flustered and terrified and they only had half an hour left to make it. So everybody struggled. Some people struggled more than others, and we had to have like a speaking to at one point, and they were like, well, naming no names, but could we all try and think about other people's feelings and stuff? Because like
Okay.
you'd have the story people, the story people with the clipboards who were like telling the story and interviewing you when you were at your worst, and people were literally telling them where to go, like at times. So we had to have a bit of talking to, like, just could we de-stress a little bit. So it was quite a strange sort of thing where that they're putting you under this stress, but they expect you to sort of just calm down a little bit. But
Definitely.
in the end, it's just glass and it breaks, and it was just TV, and it all worked out for most
Mm.
people in the end anyway. So
Fantastic. And your winning piece, the autobiographical installation,
yeah.
put together in a very short amount of time. Could you elaborate on the concept behind it and what it meant to you to create such a personal work under those circumstances?
Well, I mean, we're given briefs throughout the whole thing. You're
Mhm.
basically, you're dictated to what you need to be thinking about. And if you're playing the game, you sort of know what they want to see, I guess, in a way. That piece, like the last one, is the one where you just get to do whatever you want. So my piece was called Bodge Job, and it was basically about that process of having to knock something together like as quick as you could without really too much consideration, without the right tools for the job. So it was inflatable hammers like you get at the fair, and then inflatable screwdrivers, and then I took all of the kiln, all of the gallery furniture, all of the plinths, and I made these big glass screws, and I sort of screwed them all together with these big glass screws into this like messy lump thing. And it was about my feelings of inadequacy while I'm trying to do this without the correct tools, and just making a hash of it and being sort of forced into making a hash of something that you really want to try hard with. So it wasn't really as personal as they tried to make out. It was more like poking fun at the whole thing, really, which I quite enjoyed, because
Yeah.
they didn't get it. I don't think, a couple of times where I tried to like poke fun at the concept of the show, they didn't really get it. So
Did you watch their subsequent series?
I did, yeah, because friends of mine were you know, on the next season. Maddie Hughes, who works over the road, she was in the next one, and John Moran, and like people who I'd sort of followed for a long time were on it. As the seasons went along, I sort of found that it became more professional. Like a lot of professionals, like people with like
Mhm.
masses of experience, were on the show competing against people who were sort of up and coming, and it just changed the dynamic with that amount of professionalism on it. And
Mhm.
so everyone sort of seemed to have a little bit of an agenda in the later seasons. And I was actually really disappointed on the fourth one, the last season before it's been cancelled, that they didn't have more of an international focus. Like I was expecting a Czech glassmaker, at least one Italian, come on, maybe someone from the Middle East or something like that, but they didn't have any of that. They didn't really stretch that. It was all sort of very American based still, so it was a bit of a disappointment. But it was still a good watch. You get an insight into other people's sort of ways of thinking.
Definitely. And yeah, you also mentioned that it propelled you into the spotlight a little bit. How was your life and career changed after the show aired? Were there any new opportunities that arose directly from it?
Well, there wasn't, in a lot of ways there wasn't, because it was lockdown when my season came
Hmm.
out. So when we filmed the last episode, they were literally ripping the stage down around us to get everyone out before they shut all the airports. And we'd been quite closeted the whole time we were there. We were a bit sort of segregated from the real world, obviously. And so I get back to Heathrow and I'm like, no one's here to meet me. No one's here. And where's all the toilet roll gone? You know what I mean? So it was like, by the time the show came out, it was still like in the thick of all of that sort of calamity. So I wasn't able to travel and demonstrate, and I did a lot of Zoom stuff, which like became a bit cloying in the end and stuff. But I didn't get to do the whole tour thing, and I was pretty glad about that, really, because as I said, it's not something I ever really imagined myself doing. I'm more of like a home but based sort of person, a bit homely and whatever. So I was quite pleased that I didn't have to do this whole sort of after thing. But we connected with some amazing people and collectors, and you know it opened the American scene to us a bit. And it was great. The fallout, I call it the fallout of the show. It had its pros and cons, but in the end it was like, it was really good and very special time. It only lasts so long. People ask me about it now, and in talks like this, people always ask me about it, but day to day, you don't think about it, and it's sort of like something what happened.
Oh, fantastic. So we'll move on now then to a really fascinating and important project that you're currently involved in, which is the quest to revive mouth-blown flat glass in the UK. For those who are unfamiliar, could you explain what this glass is and why it's considered a recently extinct craft in this country?
Yeah, so we had a company called English Antique that was doing this process. So it's the cylinder process or the muff process, and that's to do with the way it's sort of blown. There are variations of this theme, but this is the way of blowing sheet glass, like in the most sort of efficient way. The company English Antique were practicing this until a couple of years ago when they moved their studio, and they had a massive piece of industrial equipment which they used for this process, and the piece of equipment was too large to move to their new studio. There was probably a financial decision as well to stop pursuing it. And this is something which I've discovered is quite common. Sheet glass making isn't an artisan process. It's an industrial process, it's an architectural process. And so the idea of hand blowing it is still, very industrial. The way the factories, glass crystal factories were very industrialized as well. So it's not an artisan process. So there are currently 4 places, I think, in the world that do this. There's 2 in Europe that are big concerns. Lambert's is the biggest, and is an enormous factory, makes thousands and thousands of meters of glass, all hand blown in this traditional way, all really beautiful and incredibly well made and everything like that, but not what I would consider an artisan process. It's a factory process. There's another place in France which has the same sort of theme, and then in America there are 2 places that are doing it, and this is where the artisanal whatever, this is where the artist bit comes into it, because the places that are doing it in the US are individual makers who are really fronting it. They work with small teams, they work in modular units instead of a big conveyor belt system of making. So the sheets that they're creating have got real sort of personality and a real difference from like a manufactured, hand-blown manufactured sheet, similar to what English Antique were doing for quite a number of years. So it was interesting to actually travel to a different country to learn about the process rather than learning about it here. But there is, a certain amount of secrecy around all of this because it is such a rare craft. And, with things of this rarity, you either are sharing the hell out of it or you're trying to keep it on the down low. So I think they went for that route rather than the other.
So what do you think it was about you that you thought that you were the person to revive this craft? Was it the sense of a loss of our heritage, or was it the technical challenge involved? What was it for you?
Well, I've been messing around with this process for years. So the second year that I was actually blowing glass, we had a festival here in Stourbridge, and a good friend of mine who's actually been working on this project with me for the last sort of decade, Laura Atkinson, who is a stained glass conservator with a history of glass blowing as well. She suggested, why don't we do like a medieval sheet, like a broad sheet, which is a similar sort of method to the cylinder method. And I sort of went along with it, and we made this sort of lumpy bit of amber glass in a sort of rough square. And she was so excited about it. She was like utterly amazed and enthralled by the process. And she said, even the places that do this, like Lambert's, they don't actually do it in the medieval way. And so what we'd just done was like something that people just haven't done at all for like years and years. She wouldn't know when the last time this process was done. It is very similar, but it has some very unique differences from the cylinder process. So I actually started off doing this process in a way which is even rarer than the one I'm trying to do now, So her sort of excitement and interest in this sort of wonky little sheet really sort of infected me. And because I also started out with stained glass, I could see there's something there. So we have been like hiring studios and hiring time and working at my place, doing this every now and again when we could. As soon as I moved into the studio here, I've got total control of my world, and except for the part that Bethany controls, of course, but I can sort of direct myself in what I want to do now. And I thought, well, this is the perfect time to actually really go for this. And then English Antique stopped doing it. So it sort of all hit, like all the things from over the years sort of hit at the right time. And the more I've done it, the more interested I've become in it. I mean, I don't like losing anything. I mean, I started working with glass in the decline, in the industrial decline, like at the end of the decline, really, everything was gone by the time I started. Really, the college that I wanted to apply to closed down and moved into a smaller site. The university I studied at is now closed. So I've seen everything go, and the opportunity to reverse something just is just too good to miss, really, and it's hit at just the right time. And it is, I mean, I can make, I'm not being arrogant or anything, but I'm pretty good at this, and I can make almost anything in hot glass. I've never made anything that's as difficult and as tricky and as weird as trying to turn a bubble into a cylinder into a sheet. It's like it doesn't want to do it. It's not a natural process. So there's an awful lot of challenge in there, which really sort of gets me, engaged with it as well on a sort of day-to-day basis.
Great. And you were awarded one of our bursaries, supported
Yes,
by
thank
Soane
you.
Britain, to travel to the US and learn the kind of the finer skills, trying to yeah well, you'll tell us a little bit about what exactly you did. Can you tell us about the trip, what you learnt, what was your
Sure.
experience of learning from craftspeople in the US?
Yeah, so I mean, I really was at an impasse. I'd done a lot of experimentation here, and I remember when I first spoke to Heritage Crafts about this. What I'm trying to do. The crux of it was like I can't get any further with this, and I'd applied for another sort of bursary from you before, but the what I needed wasn't really. It's a bit out of remit, I think, and I think I'm very grateful for you for like twisting the rules a little bit to get me out there, because obviously I had to travel, and that was the main expense. I had to stay there. That was another big expense. The people who I were learning from didn't want anything from me. They didn't want any money. They didn't run a course. They were just literally saying, "You get over here, we'll show you everything you need to know." And they did. So like I land in Seattle, and the first thing I do, I don't travel well at all. I was like horrendously jet lagged and very miserable. But I went and saw Jim Flanagan, who's the owner at Fremont, and just got like sort of swept away by this guy, and ended up like spending a few hours there, just like chewing the cud and chatting about stuff. And literally the next day I was in there at 6 o'clock, and I was learning the stages and being part of the team. And the trip was absolutely exhausting. It's like I sort of at some point I thought, why am I thinking I'm on holiday? Because this is just so not a holiday. I was up at 5, and then I was working from 6, and I was blowing with Jim these massive great big cylinders, and then I was opening them out, and I just left the studio sort of like crippled and wizened and, and stuff like that, and frazzled. It was like totally exhausting, but that's the only way to learn it. And I feel like I was able to be useful to them as well, because the glass blowing side of it, I picked up sort of fairly quickly. It's very different from like normally, you're blowing on a platform and you're swinging these great big lengths of glass and trying to get this heavy mass of glass into a really delicate thickness. 3 mil glass is incredibly delicate, and to have a cylinder that's like nearly 4 foot long is incredibly heavy, but bends when you hold it. It's like a really weird state of being for the material. So I was just thrown straight into it, and anything I needed to know, anything I asked, I was sort of given instant and overwhelming responses a lot of the time. I mean, Jim is like a really smart guy. He's a chemist as well, glass chemist, through trial and error. Which I think is like something you couldn't really get away with anymore, but he knows an awful lot he shouldn't about glass chemistry, I'd say. And yeah, and that was like the best way to learn, and the freedom I had there to practice stuff as well. So if I wanted to do part of the process more, like the splitting of the cylinders, that was really difficult to sort of get to grips with, because each color and each textured sheet had like a different way of being broken open. And it had to be done like very carefully, and I needed practice at that. And so every morning they were like, right, you can do the cutting, you'll do the cutting again. And I messed some up, of course I did, but they were amazing. Just like, okay, that's all right, just this is how you avoid ruining our product. you know so I tried my hardest, and I got there in the end. Yeah.
Fantastic. You were kind enough to send through some images before the session, so I'll just share my screen now. Maybe you can talk us through some of those.
Yeah,
Let me
sure.
know when you can see that.
So this is a sheet that I made as a collaborative project here before the trip. So as you know, as you can see, I'm already sort of doing it. This was half of a cylinder, which was the main thing that I needed to learn out there, how to open an entire cylinder rather than splitting it in half and slumping it. I mean, that's sort of, you know, it's sort of cheating, and you don't get the full uh, breadth of the sheet. So that was a piece that I made with Laura as taking direction from her. She wanted a sort of tartan inspired design, and this sort of thing, you know, is really where I want to pursue the craft in the future, is making sort of bespoke sheet, because this, you know, there's a disconnect between the stained glass artists and the glass they're buying. They buy off the shelf and they're basically given, they take what they're given basically, you know, but the opportunity to be able to design and customize the glass before they even start painting it, I think is a really interesting opportunity and something that I want to pursue, and I'm already sort of making inroads to that. This was actually a great photo actually of our studio, and this is the cylinder being blown. So you know, we've done all of the color work quite small, and then you inflate the whole thing and it stretches out. And this is the part where you're trying to blow the cylinder to a specific thickness, and you can't measure this. You know, there's no way of measuring. It's all done by experience. And Jim had like a really interesting way of judging it. It's like if you heat glass too much, it sort of starts to crumple, and when it's really thin it crumples quite dramatically, and he's like, that's when you know it's thin enough. If it's like if it's almost crumpled into an irrevocable mess, that's when you know it's the right thickness. So it's like this really fine balance. When I was doing this one, it's like it's nowhere near thin enough, so I sort of felt really good. Oh look, I can do this dead easy. But when I actually split the cylinder, it's like at least 5 mil all over, which isn't quite right, you know. And again, this is me and Laura outside the cone. So that's the studio is just on the right in that image, and the cone is looking a bit hairy, but it's all been renovated now. The council did like a £2.5 million pound renovation, scaffolded the thing inside and out, took all the plant work out, and redid all of the grouting in between the bricks, and you can actually see like the test patch in that image. You know, there's like a weird above the door, like half, like third of the way up the cone, there's like a test patch, and that is all heritage mortars as well, because this is a listed building, a very important building, so they have to use like heritage mortars. So they did that one summer and then left it over the winter, and just to see which mortar would hold up the best. They, you know, all of them only last about 10 years, so they got to do this all over again in about 10 years. So, and again, this was an event we actually put on as part of a craft book launch. So we had like a, you know, we had the public in, and we had art lovers and craft lovers in while we were doing these demonstrations. Again, like Bethany's initiative, like setting up these things so people can see what we do. And that's just the same. I can't remember how many of these I sent, but this is Ryan, who's my assistant here. So he's a local guy as well. We've been to all the same places. We worked in the same studios around the Midlands when we were first sort of starting out, and you know, it's great. It's really rare to find someone, you know, who's available and skilled enough to work with us and local. So it's been really great to have him on board with everything. And he loves the cylinder thing. He said like he's never seen glass behave the way it behaves when it's opening out, and he's got the bug, I can tell. So like if there's going to be someone who I can train to do it, it's going to be him, you know. I mean, he's first on the list anyway, but at least he's going to enjoy it, you know. This is a great image of like the stock of flash that they have at Fremont. So this is the flashed glass, which is clear on one side and then has a thin layer of color. Very good for sandblasting and acid etching, and you know, working on multiple layers. And then this is one of their sort of spotty cylinders on the cutting block, having its section removed. You know, when these sections came out in one go, it's really satisfying. And they none of this stuff is wasted. So like the tops of the muffs and these slithers that they cut out, they get sold by weight, and people use them for stained glass and mosaics and little bits and bobs, you know. So all of this stuff, you know, gets used as well.
Why do they take out a slither rather than doing a single cut?
So they take out the slither because when you transfer this cut cylinder into the heating chamber, because there's no way of holding it in the chamber, it's just a flat shelf. If you put it down on the cylinder, you've got a chance of it not rolling around. And so they balance it on this slim, it's like makes a flat spot basically. They balance it on this spot until the whole thing starts to sag, and then because there's a bit of distance between the two edges, they don't sort of instantly touch and weld together. They sort of miss each other, and they make this crazy like Fibonacci spiral in the kiln, in the opening chamber, where they just miss each other and the weight slumps, and then you have to flip the thing over and open it out. So it just increases the likelihood of you being able to do it. In the European method, the industrial method, they don't take the sliver out, they do one split. But as the cylinders are heated, they're put into like this conveyor belt rig thing, which allows them to slightly open by the time they trundle their way to the opening chamber. So yeah, it's another part of the methodology that Jim has sort of developed, and you know has been used elsewhere as well in modular sort of systems for opening. And then this is the crazy 6 burner opening chamber. And this was Dylan, this guy. So he'd been there about a year and a half, and he was learning he was training in the opening process. So he was like the gatherer and the color application and blocking and preparing the mass for blowing for Jim. So Jim would just do the blowing part, and then he had a little team which set the color up for him. And then Dylan was learning the opening process as well, and he was really good at it. And he was like very because he was learning it at the time, he understood all the questions I was asking. He understood why I was like, what the hell is this bit about? Because everyone else there had done it for so long. They were like, well, that's just what you do, isn't it? But because he was still struggling with the process as well, he was invaluable in, getting these points across to me in a way that I could understand as like a sort of sheet opening layman.
Yeah. It sounds like the methodology we use for some of our skills transmission films,
Right.
putting in a semi-skilled learner to act as the bridge between the viewer and the master craftsman to ask the right kind of questions.
Exactly. Yeah,
That
that's really
might
smart.
seem obvious to the craftsperson.
Exactly, and they don't take into account all of those struggles because it becomes second nature. And the thing about this is, it's a very easy thing to say how you do this, but it's a completely other thing doing it. And it's like it doesn't matter how procedural you are about it. Each sheet acts completely differently, and each color that the sheet has a massive effect on the way it opens, and the slight variations in thicknesses, and even the atmosphere in the room, the way the air is moving in the room can spoil the sheet, because in the end these you're actually using quite a reasonable amount of force to do this, but the sheet itself is 3 mil. It's so easily broken even when it's plastic and hot and pliable, and you're using wet tools as well. That's the thing, the tools have to be wet because you're sticking them inside this chamber with like flame blaring around them. So if you stick a dry tool in there, it's better for the glass, but it just burns away to nothing within seconds. And again, this is Jim. So Jim's the guy, the main guy, the gaffer, the head glass blower, and the person who sort of started it all off. He had a group of 4 people who he was doing it with, like investing and business management and things like that. But Jim's like the only one left, and he is 76, I think, and he blows 15 massive cylinders a day and opens 9 of those in the afternoon. And again, it's like the timing of this was perfect because the lease is up on their property there, which they've been in for 40 years. And Jim's wife is like, right, come on, you're retiring now. So this was like the last chance I really got to learn from someone. So one of the 4 people, one of the 4 places we're going to lose quite soon,
Yeah.
so it'll be down to 3.
The stars really did align in terms of all the
They so
planning.
did, yeah. I don't know whether I put the other image from this in, but
Mm,
this, no, I didn't.
yep.
But I took like a sneaky image of this woman. So she'd driven 9 hours to come and see Jim and to get her first crate of Fremont glass. So that's their truck there with the crate sort of strapped in. And Jim, she'd been talking to Jim about making like a custom sheet, and he'd forgot to pack it. And then he remembered it and gave it to her, like, and she was holding this sheet and just like beaming, and she was almost like welling up, like talking to
Wow,
this guy who she'd heard about and knew about for years. It was such a special place, and like again, it's other people's excitement about this stuff which really like gets you going, because people were just in awe of it. And with all of its intrigue and faults and flaws and things, that's what makes it so special for people. Yeah.
fantastic. So yeah, we'll stop sharing there because like we've had some questions come through in advance. We might have some in the chat as well. If you haven't asked your question, please do add it in the chat, although we haven't got a great deal of time left. But the first submitted question was from Lynn Lee. Lynn, do you want to unmute and ask the question yourself?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. I'm not sure my background music is like too noise or not, but please let me know if you can't hear me clear.
It's fine. Yeah, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so hi, I'm Ling, and I'm currently I'm the student from Royal College of Art, and I'm studying design futures. So my current project is doing endangered the future of endangered craft in the UK, and the particular focus on the embodied knowledge within the craft practice, how we preserve and passing to the future generations.
Hmm.
So I love the everything like your I love the everything like your experience just shared. So I think my question is I'm wondering like how would you describe the kind of embodied knowledge or the skill like involved in your glass blowing practice? It kind of like touch or like sense like the uh, kind of the knowledge there's not from the guide or like the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think so much of glass blowing is muscle memory, and it's a reactive process. So you can read the procedure for making a glass object, but you really have to react to the material. It's a very unique sort of physical process. It's not like, it's more like a dance than anything else, and you have to practice the steps of a dance. But anything within the environment or the other people you're working with or the choreography, anything that slightly changes alters the entire thing, you see. So you have to build up like a rapport with this material, which you can't read about and you can't learn about. It's something you have to do inherently with your relationship with the material, and everyone has a different way of doing that. So my physicality with the glass is different from other people's physicality, and it not only reflects in the objects you make, but it reflects in how you experience the whole thing. So people have to find their own way, I guess, with this. It's the same with a lot of crafts, but particularly I feel with glass, because the material is so unusual and it's living as you're working with it. You do have to spend a lot of time building up your physical relationship with it so that you can partner well and you can do the dance properly.
Yeah, that's really clear. And just one more question is like do you like how many students are like learning this blowing craft now, and do you have kind of like a future version or future plan for like to develop the glass blowing craft to like 2035, something like that?
Well, I mean, I'm not in charge of that. This is the thing. It's like if I was in charge of the education of glassblowers, there'd probably be like a lot more of them. But I'm not like, someone needs to put me in charge of it, really. The universities are in charge of us. They're in charge of our craft. They are in charge of the future of our craft. And to be perfectly honest, they're doing a terrible job of encouraging the physical practical aspect of making and of craft and of glass. I was actively encouraged out of the studio. You don't need to learn that. You need to do this. You need to go to this lecture. You need to think about different things and become, a more sort of a different sort of artist and maker. Whereas I feel like universities should be pushing the practical aspects of it, and then you learn the however you want to express your artistic sort of side afterwards, because I'm still learning that. I don't think that's something as well which you can't really get that clarity in 3 years of education. The 3 years of education should be about practicalities and about understanding material, and then your conceptual growth will happen for the rest of your life. So unfortunately, I'm not in charge of it. The universities are at the moment, and I'd love to see that change, but I'm not quite sure how.
Thanks for your question, Lynn. That's
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you so much.
And in the chat, Elena Thompson makes the important point about the National Glass Centre in Sunderland and the need to save the legacy of teaching and training that's happened there. If anyone wants to know more about that, do get in touch with us and we can signpost you. Fantastic. And we also had a question from Sarah Smits. Sarah, do you want to ask your question?
Hi. So yes, my question kind of relates to the previous one. In fact, how do you think we can encourage this now extinct craft realistically, where you've got to learn to dance, you've got the expense of furnaces and kilns and things like that, which is on an industrial scale, as you say, that there are individuals who run sort of glass blowing courses for sort of artistic purposes and so on. But in terms of the flat mouth blown sheet glass, that's something quite different.
It's
And
totally different, yeah.
so how can you, how do we sort of say to people, give this a go, when actually it's quite sort of out of reach in many ways, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's like interesting talking about like the National Glass Centre and the loss of that. That is where I first saw this process being practiced in the UK, and it was from a guy who used to work at Hartley Woods, and he taught me how to lap color, which is like a very sort of English sort of style of lapping color for flat glass. But the problem is that all of this knowledge and all of these processes have been built within an industrial environment, and people make business decisions in that environment which reflect, don't have any consideration for heritage or for the preservation of a craft. So with English Antique, them stopping doing the cylinder process was about money, and it was about, partly, and it was about the company that now owned them. It's not a viable thing to continue. The same happened with Blenco in the US, in West Virginia. They used to make loads and loads of sheet. Now they make jugs and vases and tableware and things. So it is a very, very unique proposition to say to a glassblower, why don't you consider making flat glass? And I don't really have an answer for that, really. I mean, it's the right set of circumstances have to be in place for someone to even consider it. What I am interested in is making sure that if somebody does want to do it, they can come to me and they can say, how do I do this? And I can tell them how to do it without any fuss, without any bother, without any they don't need a bursary or whatever. They can get a bursary for like actually doing it and buying the color and stuff you need to like mess around with, but the knowledge is the thing that I'm interested in, and the practicalities of physically doing it and how that's done and the materials and the equipment that's involved. If I can keep that around, then maybe one day someone will ask me how to do it and I'll be able to tell them or show them. That's sort of my focus at the minute, as well as trying to get it off the extinct list, which is my sort of overall aim. And also, you know, there is a demand for this sort of thing. There's a big demand in the States. You know, I could be shipping the rubbish stuff I'm making at the minute back to the States because they want something new and exciting, but there's not a demand enough for a big industrial setup, because we already have somewhere that does that better than anyone else could. You know, the industry is now in one place in Lamberts, and that's where most people get their stuff from, or in the French factory that does it. So there's not room for that big amount of demand, so we don't need a lot of people doing it. What we do need is people experimenting and using the sheet in a new way, using it for different sort of modern architectural applications, and making something with personality, and like exploring the process in, you know, as a designer, as a contemporary artist, as a lighting manufacturer. You know, we need something different to happen with the process rather than what it's traditionally seen as. And I think the scope for that, you know, that's definitely what, you know, I hope that people will end up doing in the end. Encouraging people to do it, it's like, it is the maddest thing I've ever made out of glass. You know, it's like I can't explain how weird and exciting it is to be doing it. So, you know, I'll try and push that as much as I can whenever I can.
And then do you think you'd be able to supply sort of clear glass as well in some shape or form? Because, for instance, working in heritage, we basically now have to import everything that we want for replacements in sash windows and the like. But is that a feasible option for you?
Well, sash is a different thing, really. Like when it comes to like plain glazing and things like that, there isn't really a way that I could compete. You know, it's like in terms, like if you have to import a plane of clear glass for a sash window, you couldn't do better than getting it from the people who do that really well. Do you know what I mean? It's like that isn't really part of what I'm thinking of, because I would have to do this on a completely different scale to be able to do that. What I am interested in is medieval restoration, and again working with my friend Laura Atkinson on that, understanding the compromises that people are making with medieval restoration at the minute. I think is sort of unacceptable, because, you know, Lamberts have this restoration grade glass, but it's not really medieval style. It's just the glass that they make in restoration colors. It's not medieval style glass because it's a completely different process. It's the broadsheet, it's spreadsheet rather than cylinder. So that's what we're talking about together, to try and fill that niche and, you know, convince people that they don't have to compromise, you know, a restoration project with restoration glass which isn't accurate and isn't in keeping with what they're trying to do as a conservationist, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Sarah. We are running over time now, sadly, but I will say thank you all for joining, especially those who made a donation during the sign up. We do say the best way to support us is becoming a member. It's not just for makers, it's for anyone that supports the work that we're doing. Not only does it help provide a small financial contribution to our ongoing work, but it also allows us to build this global community of people intent on preserving the skills here in the UK. So it's really important to come and join our movement. So fantastic. You've covered much of what I was going to say in the wrap up already, which is great. Let me just switch that back. But Kate's made a good point in the chat, which will allow us to wrap up, and a chance for you to promote yourself maybe. You've been posting some wonderful test sheets on social media as an option to support investment in you and to keep pursuing this. Could you tell us when your next release will be so she can start saving?
So I'm at the end of that part of the fundraising thing. So I need basically to get the equipment and the materials that I need to do. I mean, I'm already doing it, but to do it properly, I need about like $4.5 grand to actually get all of that stuff. So these auctions and things were a way of fundraising for that. I've actually, you know, come to the end of those sample sheets, and the stuff I'm making now, I'm selling sort of directly to a few makers. So I will be selling more sheet, but it'll be in a slightly different way. I'm working out my unit price per square centimeter at the minute, so I'm getting to grips with how this will be, how the buying and the selling will work with this, because in the end it's like I need to sell this stuff to make it a viable craft, because I'm not using it for anything at the minute. It's other people that need to use it. So in order to get it off the extinct list eventually in a couple of years, I need to sell it. So I need to figure out how that's going to work and how I can build that within my business. But yeah, I mean, I do everything on Instagram. That's my main thing. So it's at eWalker Glass Art. And if you go through my page, you'll see some of the amazing videos I took of Jim and of Tyler and stuff at the Fremont team and in Monarch, the other studio I visited there. So you can keep up to date on Instagram, because that's where everyone does everything, isn't it?
I very much recommend you go and have a look at those. They are fantastic. A message from Elena from Gateshead. She'd like to link up with you about providing a quote for the film she's putting together around about the National Glass Centre and its continuation. So
yeah,
I will link you up afterwards.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. It's been an absolute privilege hearing from you in this last hour. Do follow Elliot on social media, and I'll wish all of you a pleasant evening, and please do join us again the next time. Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.